Okay, I want you to stop for a second and try to guess exactly what it takes to be considered middle class these days. Got a number in your head? Well, how about $296,452? Crazy, right? And no, that is not the price of a starter home or some fancy sports car. According to a 2026 Smart Asset study, that staggering figure is actually the upper income limit required simply to be considered middle class in San Jose, California today. I mean, think about it. If you are making close to $300,000 a year, you are just barely scraping the ceiling of the middle class in that city. It is a stunning number, and honestly, it begs a much larger question about what is fundamentally happening to our economy, our communities, and our aspirations.
So, welcome to this explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're here with us. Today, we're basically going to act as financial and sociological doctors, and we are checking the vital signs of the modern American dream. We're going to dive deep into the data to look at housing, income, the price of your groceries, and even the overall health of our communities, just to see exactly where we stand in 2026.
Here is our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll be walking through the evolving American dream, followed by the great postponement, redefining the middle class, the price of dinner, the decline of community, and finally, rebuilding the dream.
Let's jump right into part 1, the evolving American dream.
You know, to really understand where we are today, we kind of have to look in the rearview mirror first. For much of our recent history, especially during that massive post-World War II boom, local land use plans and a booming economy made housing widely affordable. In fact, nearly 90% of Americans achieved the dream of home ownership at some point in their lifetimes. Back in the 20th century, the American dream followed this very familiar, almost rhythmic sequence. You finish school, you find a job, get married, buy a home, and raise a family. By their 30s, people were typically starting their own households. But, as you probably already know, the 21st century reality is a whole different ballgame. Today, that sequence hasn't vanished completely, but the milestones? They are severely delayed due to extended financial struggles.
Which brings us nicely to part 2, the great postponement.
Real estate experts at Wharton actually use this specific term, the great postponement, to describe how these traditional markers of adulthood are just getting pushed further and further back. The dream is still there, for sure, but it's like it's on layaway. And the main culprit for this postponement, well, it largely comes down to housing. Since 2022, housing costs for new buyers have soared by a staggering 40%. That is a massive, massive squeeze on the wallet. Mortgage rates jumped from 3% to 6%, and the housing market essentially locked out a huge wave of first-time buyers.
And the direct social impact of those soaring costs is profound. Right now, 1 in 3 young adults between the ages of 24 and 35 are living with their parents. Let that sink in for a second. 1 in 3. This actually represents a return to historic high points that we previously only saw during the peak of the pandemic and before that, literally the Great Depression. As a result, Americans are marrying later and having children much later.
So all of this is creating what researchers call a K-shaped economy. It's basically an economic fork in the road. It means that young adults who have access to intergenerational family wealth, like say parents who can help out with a down payment, they continue to progress upward toward homeownership. Meanwhile, their equally capable peers who just don't have that family wealth face severe and sometimes insurmountable obstacles. Achieving the American dream is becoming increasingly dependent on the circumstances of your birth rather than just good old-fashioned hard work and saving.
Moving right along to part 3, redefining the middle class.
Now, this intense economic pressure isn't just a housing issue. It's about the rapidly shifting, highly geographically dependent definition of what a middle-class income actually is in 2026. Looking at data from a recent Smart Asset study, which applies the Pew Research definition of middle class, so that's 2/3 to double the median income, the geographic contrast is just wild. In San Jose, like we talked about earlier, the bounds of the middle class stretch all the way up to nearly $300,000, and the absolute bare minimum to enter the middle class is nearly $100,000. But then compare that to Cleveland, Ohio. Over there, a household can be considered middle class, making just under $29,000 a year. It's crazy. What buys you a very comfortable middle-class life in Buffalo or Cleveland wouldn't even cover your basic rent and expenses in San Francisco.
And you know, this disparity exists at the state level too. To gain entry into the middle class in Mississippi or West Virginia, a household only needs around $39,000 to $40,000. But up in Massachusetts or New Jersey, that minimum entry point jumps up to nearly $70,000. The American dream is effectively wearing a totally different price tag, depending almost entirely on your zip code.
Okay, let's head into part 4, the price of dinner.
Let's shift our focus down from the big macroeconomics of housing and salaries straight to the microeconomics of your wallet at the grocery store.
Based on the USDA's August 2026 Food Price Outlook, prices for all food are forecast to increase by 3.0% this year. But check out the split in this forecast. Food at home, so your standard groceries, is forecasted to increase by 2.5%, which is actually slightly slower than the historical average. However, food away from home, meaning dining out at restaurants, is jumping up by 3.6%. So essentially, paying for the convenience of someone else cooking your dinner is inflating much faster than just buying the ingredients yourself.
But let's ground these percentages by looking at a few specific items in your shopping cart, because those aggregate numbers can really hide some wild swings. For instance, a tight cattle supply means beef and veal prices are surging almost 10%. Sugar and sweets up 7.1%. Fresh veggies are up nearly 6%. But here is a super interesting one. Eggs are forecast to actually plummet by 30.8% in 2026. Why? Well, because after those massive price spikes caused by the highly pathogenic avian influenza over the last few years, replacement flocks have finally recovered and egg production is bouncing right back. It's actually a great real-world example of just how delicate our supply chains really are.
That brings us to part 5, the decline of community. So housing costs are way up, grocery receipts are this mixed bag of inflation, and the major milestones of life are being severely delayed. But what is the actual sociological toll of all these economic pressures? Well, to understand this, we can look to Robert Putnam's landmark analysis of American isolation. Putnam popularized this really important concept called social capital. This refers to the networks of relationships, the face-to-face interactions, and the active civic engagement that truly hold a society together. In his famous book, Bowling Alone, Putnam documented a massive, aggregate loss in memberships for groups that used to be the absolute bedrock of American life. We're talking the PTA, the Lions Clubs, the Red Cross, and yes, even bowling leagues. People are still bowling, sure, but they are doing it alone, meaning they are missing out on the civic discussions and the relationship building of a league environment.
When breaking down the core causes of this civic decline, Putnam attributed 50% to generational change and 25% to the rise of electronic entertainment, like television and the internet, which completely individualized our leisure time. But here's the kicker. 10% is attributed to work pressure, and another 10% to suburban sprawl. And this links directly back to those earlier points we discussed. When housing affordability forces people to move way out into sprawling suburbs just to find a home they can afford, and when they have to work much longer hours just to maintain a middle-class income, their social capital erodes. They simply don't have the time or the physical proximity to engage in their local communities.
And finally, Part 6, Rebuilding the Dream. So how do policy and collective action actually begin to repair these fractured pillars? Well, Wharton real estate experts point out that simply lowering mortgage rates alone is not going to solve the affordability crisis. If anything, cheaper borrowing just drives prices higher if there aren't enough homes to actually buy. The central challenge here is supply, specifically the availability of starter homes. To fix this, experts outline some absolutely crucial steps. We need to reform local zoning laws, streamline the permitting processes, invest in higher density development, and take those successful affordable pilot programs and bring them to a massive scale. Basically, we need collective action at the state and local levels to physically build the foundation of the American dream all over again.
But here's what I really want you to take away from all of this. Despite that K-shaped economy, the incredibly expensive beef, the delayed marriages, and the rising civic isolation, the American spirit remains incredibly resilient. According to a 2026 Gallup poll, a whopping 76% of Americans still believe the American dream is achievable. So the dream has definitely not died, it is just evolving, exactly as it always has alongside economic change.
Which brings us right to our final thought. The landscape of this country has fundamentally shifted. The timeline is longer, the price tag is way higher, and our community structures look entirely different than they used to. So, I want to leave you with this question to ponder today. If the American dream now requires more money and offers less community, how will your generation redefine it? Thank you so much for hanging out with me for this explainer, and as always, keep learning.